Chapter 1. The King's Solitude. The silence was a thick, crushing blanket, heavy as the armor Ragnar wore even in the heart of his fortress. It was the only silence he ever truly trusted. The obsidian citadel wasn't just a home, it was a scar carved into the mountainside, a constant, dark reminder of the necessity of ruthlessness. Ragnar stood before the immense holographic tactical table. He was furious, not with an enemy, but with the map itself. It showed the western human border, a perpetual infection that never fully healed. His goal was simple: maintain perfect order and strategic foresight. He had to, because the safety of his entire Leaken realm depended on it. He ran a scarred finger along a jagged line on the projection. Control. That's all there is. He was a king defined by absence. Absence of warmth, absence of trust, absence of everything that had made him vulnerable before. That memory was a cold, sharp shard, and he kept it embedded because it kept him strong. It was the cost of his crown. He leaned into the table. The reports detailed minor aggression, human encroachment into the Shadow Woods, and escalating rhetoric from minor nobles. Pathetic. The infiltration reports on the Vanya trading post, they lack necessary detail, Ragnar murmured. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, a sound that could shatter glass or soothe a terrified pup. Here, it simply cuts through the silence. In fact, the financial figures Vanya was maneuvering, a deliberate misuse of low-level trade tariffs, were too complex for a mere opportunist. This wasn't minor nobility playing games. This was calculated. Meanwhile, a subtle sound, a rhythmic thump-thump-thump, echoed up the stairwell. Vulcan, his lead general, was ascending. Ragnar waited, his golden eyes locked on the projected name, Lord Vanya. That name felt like a stone hitting glass, sharp and destructive. Vulcan, a massive Leaken whose fur was turning iron-gray with age, stepped into the room. He carried a parchment, tightly rolled and sealed with a panicked, unfamiliar sigil. Your Majesty. Coded message. Direct relay from the human territories, Vulcan said, his tone clipped. It's regarding Vanya's movements. It's urgent. Ragnar slowly lifted his gaze. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the seal, not the man. Details, Vulcan. Not urgency. As the silence stretched, Vulcan unrolled the message, his large hands trembling slightly. Vanya, he's openly hosting known anti-treaty factions now. They talk about a political surgical strike. They are targeting the treaty's lineage clause itself. But then, Vulcan added a whisper, a conspiratorial note that sent a shiver down Ragnar's own primal spine. They're not aiming for war, sire. They're aiming for the collapse of the magic that prevents war. Ragnar's blood ran colder than the citadel stone. That's why he felt the anomaly in the financial reports. Vanya was funding more than just rhetoric. He was funding an internal coup against the foundational magic of the realms. He was playing with fire because he thought the Lycans were too slow, too complacent to react. With a single glance, Ragnar snatched the parchment. The ink blurred before his eyes. Vanya wasn't an irritant. He was a surgical threat, and he was dangerously close to success. This called for a strategic shift. The king had found his target. Now he had to understand the full scope of the trap. Chapter 2. The Magical Tether. The air in the command room was charged, thick with the scent of fear and testosterone. Ragnar stood at the center, surrounded by his advisory council, massive, capable Lycans whose strategic minds were usually flawless. Now they looked confused. After that, General Heron, an elder Leaken whose counsel was usually gold, stepped forward. Vanya is a political opportunist, nothing more, sire. The major human houses will leash him. We should prioritize the northern supply lines. The winter stores are low. Raren's confidence was a deep error, and Ragnar felt the familiar, cold surge of impatience. Stupid. He wouldn't risk millions of lives because an old soldier failed to grasp the mystical geometry of peace. Ragnar let out a low, challenging growl, a sound that was pure authority, not fury. The Treaty of Thorns and Fangs is not a diplomatic paper, General. It is a magical binding. He slammed his fist onto the table. The holographic display shuddered and zoomed in, highlighting the Vanya lands. It cares nothing for political standing. It cares only for the lineage that sustains the magical tether. As the silence stretched, Ragnar forced them to look at the truth. Truth be told, the treaty was an intricate magical chain forged generations ago, linking the life force of the Leakin Alpha to a specific, dormant human bloodline, the Vanya line. If that lineage was completely corrupted or eliminated by the aggressor, the entire spell failed. If Vanya violates a major clause, the magical consequence is immediate, non-negotiable, and guaranteed, Ragnar continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. It forces a complete magic collapse, and that guarantees war within the fortnight. A war that would cost us everything. His words hit them like a physical blow. The council finally understood the scope of the stakes. We must find the human key, Ragnar stated. He brought up the Vanya family tree on the map. He needed someone disposable, someone easily controlled, because the treaty required a permanent union with an untainted member of that line to re-establish the bond. Lord Vanya's immediate family is useless. They're too corrupted by his ambition. Find the young ones, the minor branches, he commanded. Anyone whose life is defined by quiet obedience and whose blood is still pure enough to bind the magic. More importantly, he needed a human who was politically weak but magically vital. A female, a queen in name only. Focus on every covert asset. Ragnar's voice cracked like a whip. Find the least politically relevant member of that house. Now. Before Vanya realizes the severity of the mistake he is about to make. What followed was a scramble of lichens, their movements efficient but laced with frantic terror. They knew the danger. Ragnar watched them go, his mind already calculating the fastest route to the human capital. He had found the target, but he still didn't know the human's name. That felt like a massive gap in his strategy. What kind of monster will I be taking? That question, soft and treacherous, was an open loop in his mind. The time for strategy was over. The time for action was here. Chapter 3. The Broken Promise. The wind on the highest rampart was a living thing, and it screamed across the cold stone, clawing at Ragnar's heavy cloak. He forced himself to stare out at the distant, silent valley. He needed the chilling reminder of his purpose. He recalled the pain, the betrayal not of another, but of his own heart. Years ago, he had trusted a human advisor, believed in a plea for peace, and that trust had cost hundreds of lives. Because of that, he learned the cold truth: emotion equals strategic weakness. That belief was his core. It was the only thing that kept his people safe. I am ready to be the monster they fear, if it means they live in peace. This thought was a parallel structure of survival. He had to sacrifice himself. He had to sacrifice his heart. He had to sacrifice his morality. Just like that, he pushed the memory down, steeling himself for the violence he was about to unleash by taking a human queen. Without warning, a deep, agonizing tchrum tore through the earth beneath his feet. It wasn't the sound of thunder. It was the sound of the ancient magical treaty failing. It was a violent, wrenching sensation, like a bone snapping deep beneath the mountains. Lord Vanya hadn't merely planned. He had executed. The magical safety net had been yanked away. The Citadel's emergency alarm, a wailing, discordant shriek reserved only for a treaty breach, began to slice through the night. By the time the first guard reached his position, Ragnar was already moving. Vanya has struck. Vulcan's voice roared from the comms. A coordinated attack on the diplomatic outposts. We have confirmation, sire. The lineage link is. I know what it is. Ragnar cut him off, his voice a low, terrifying rasp. The sequence of events was inevitable. Chaos, political rupture, open war. He had maybe hours before the human kingdom fully imploded. He needed the Vanya key. Now. Ragnar didn't bother with the stairs. His body shifted, the process intense, a blinding flash of pain and power that was both thrilling and terrible. His armor ripped as his bones stretched and rearranged, his human eyes turning to feral, glowing gold. The massive, black shadow of his true Leakin alpha form eclipsed the moonlight, for thicker than any winter snow. With every heartbeat, his focus narrowed. Elara Vanya, the minor noble, the key. As if summoned, he launched himself from the rampart. The sickening speed of his fall was terrifying, but then the power of his Leakin form took over, turning the free fall into a controlled, ground-shaking sprint across the open plain. He was an arrow aimed at the White Keep. His immediate target was the pawn. His true goal was the survival of his world. Chapter 4. The Breach. The wind screamed past Ragnar's massive black form. The ground blurred beneath him, each stride covering the distance a normal horse would need 10 heartbeats for. His goal was simple: stop the treaty's collapse immediately. He had calculated the margin of error in his mind. 30 minutes. If the human-Leakin union was not established within that time, the magical damage would be irreversible, condemning both realms to decades of conflict. That's why he ran in his true form. He couldn't afford the political niceties of teleportation or air travel. He needed speed. As he crested the final ridge, the White Keep of House Vanya came into view. It was a beacon of chaos. Black smoke bloomed against the stars. The grand, white stone walls, symbols of human privilege and peace, were marred by fire and the desperate cries of guards. Lord Vanya's plan had worked perfectly. He had created the breach. Not only that, Ragnar's sensitive Leakin ears picked up the precise location of the political damage, the ancestral hall of Vanya, where the treaty was originally signed. He could feel the residual magic, once a comforting, powerful anchor, now shuddering like a massive, dying beast. Ragnar shifted slightly mid-stride, regaining his bipedal form just as he reached the perimeter, shedding his armor with a clatter of metal against the shattered cobblestones. He was focused, masking cold fury. The fury wasn't for the lives lost. It was for the strategic incompetence of the humans who played with such terrifying power. "Stop!" a terrified human guard yelled, raising a flimsy iron spear. Ragnar didn't slow down. He simply slammed his palm into the marble gates. The ancient stone cracked, and the hinges ripped away with a shriek of tortured metal. What followed was a silence among the panicking humans, sudden and complete, as they realized the terrifying reality of the Alpha King's arrival. He strode through the gaping hole, his height and sheer presence immediately dominating the chaos. He didn't see people, he saw only obstacles. He reached the hall, stepping over bodies and debris without a flicker of remorse. His eyes blazed. The air inside the hall was thick with ozone and death. The magical disruption felt like a physical tearing sensation in his chest. At the base of the massive Vanya sigil, he found her, a young woman huddled near a broken pillar. Elara Vanya. At that moment, Ragnar didn't see a victim. He saw the last, untainted tether to the binding spell. He saw a solution. He ignored her gasp of terror, ignoring the pleas of the two Vanya loyalists trying to shield her. He reached out, his hand snapping around Elara's arm with crushing authority. "The treaty is breached," he stated, his voice a guttural rasp that held the cold finality of fate. "The price of the rebinding is you." His life changed irrevocably, because in that single, ruthless act of taking her, he had launched the war and the peace simultaneously. Chapter 5. The Seizure. Elara's arm felt fragile, like a slender reed, beneath the relentless pressure of his grip. She didn't struggle immediately. She was in pure, dazed shock. Her eyes, wide and luminous, were locked on his. You can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fires. "I'm just a minor cousin." Despite that, Ragnar pulled her upright, forcing her to stand. His goal was to execute the binding protocol, acquire the asset. He viewed her as a necessary tool only. The two Vanya guards finally found their courage. "Unhand the lady, you savage," one of them yelled, charging with a broken sword. Ragnar didn't even turn. Without thinking, he swept his free arm out. The blow was purely defensive, calculated to incapacitate, not kill. The guard flew backward, hitting the wall with a sickening crunch. The second guard froze, dropping his weapon. Don't interrupt a royal binding, Ragnar said, his voice laced with the Leakin Alpha's command, forcing the guard's knees to buckle. He turned his focus back to Elara. She was trembling now, but she wasn't crying. That surprised him. He looked down at her, a slight figure, clad in the plain, expensive linen of a privileged noble, a stark contrast to the destruction around them. He saw her trauma, but then he saw the faint, shimmering magical aura around her, confirming her lineage link was pure. I am the treaty, Ragnar stated, pulling her toward the ruined ceremonial platform. And you are the key. Lord Vanya's aggression demands a permanent union to avert war. Permanent, she started, her breath catching. You mean marriage? As the truth unraveled, Ragnar didn't answer with words. He dragged her to the center of the platform. He slashed his hand with a knife he produced from his wrist sheath, letting a thick stream of his alpha blood pour onto the shattered treaty scroll. The blood immediately began to glow, attempting to repair the arcane script. He forced her hand forward. Your blood. Now. Before she could move, he pressed the tip of his knife just beneath her thumb. He didn't cut deeply, but enough to draw a clear, pearly bead of human blood. He smeared her blood across the glowing Leakin script, binding her to the reactivated magical terms. Consider the ritual complete, Ragnar declared, his voice ringing with forced authority that even the collapsing magic obeyed. The tear in the air sealed with a sound like shattering ice. The treaty was stabilized. And just like that, everything changed. Ragnar didn't wait for her to process the shock. He swept her up in his arms, bridal style, ignoring the desperate gasps from the remaining humans. His connection to her was purely transactional, and yet, the moment the blood mingled, he felt a strange, fierce possessiveness he couldn't categorize. Chapter 6: The Ride Home. The journey back was pure agony for Ragnar. Not physical pain. He was immune to exhaustion, but the mental strain of holding a strategic piece of human cargo while constantly monitoring the volatile borders. His goal was to secure the asset and re-establish the treaty's protective ward. He rode hard, shifting between his Leakin and human form for maximum efficiency. When human, he kept Elara secured against his chest. She was silent, utterly still, a strange kind of passive resistance. He could feel her heart hammering against his armor, but then he could also sense her profound, internal stillness. He kept his mind strictly on his duties, reciting border patrol deployment codes and Vanya's potential escape routes. He had to remain intensely concentrated, utterly devoid of guilt. Meanwhile, he caught faint wisps of her scent, expensive lavender and the clean, metallic hint of fear. She shifted slightly, and her delicate fingers tightened into the wool of his tunic. You saved those guards, Elara whispered, her voice husky from disuse. The ones who charged you. You didn't kill them. Ragnar kept his gaze locked on the mountain range ahead. Inefficient use of force, Queen. Live prisoners are better witnesses. Dead ones create martyrs. Even so, her observation annoyed him. It was the first time she had acknowledged him as anything other than a terrifying, necessary force. She was trying to categorize his ruthlessness. You're not a savage, she stated, not as a question, but as a quiet, firm declaration. You're a strategist. Ragnar scoffed, the sound rough in his throat. He knew the truth. He was both. The difference is negligible, Elara. Both demand blood. On the other hand, he realized he hadn't planned for conversation. He had planned for silence, for resistance, for tears. He had not planned for analysis. He felt a deep, strange frustration. She was complicating his internal equations. He needed her to be a passive pawn, simplifying his world because his entire focus had to remain on the external threat. Eventually, the sheer, imposing black mass of the obsidian citadel loomed into view, his cold, strategic haven. The citadel gates, usually wide and welcoming to the Lycans, were a narrow, intimidating maw tonight. With every step he took, the hostility of the Leakin court began to press down on them. The Lycans guarding the gates looked at Elara with pure, undisguised hatred, the face of the enemy that had almost started the war. Ragnar knew the political battle had just begun. He had secured the key, but now he had to make his court accept the pawn, and that would be the hardest fight of all. Chapter 7. The Throne Room Declaration. The silence inside the throne room was more deafening than the alarms had been. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of undisguised contempt. Every Leakin noble, general, and advisor present was staring at Elara Vanya, the human queen Ragnar had just forcibly acquired. Ragnar set Elara down gently, a necessary show of dominance and possession, not kindness. His goal was to assert his authority and enforce immediate acceptance of the political necessity. He was defending the treaty, not the girl. He felt Elara stiffen beside him. Her quiet endurance, which he'd briefly respected during the ride, was now being tested by the full weight of Leakin aggression. He locked his gaze on General Heron, who stood stiffly at the front of the council, his eyes radiating open hostility. "General Heron, you question my actions?" Ragnar's voice was pure, lethal alpha command. He didn't ask, he dictated. Heron shifted uneasily, but he did not bow.
"Sire,
the treaty is stabilized, we understand. But then, you have brought the blood of the aggressor into our most sacred heart. This pawn is a symbol of human weakness and treachery. We demand to know why she isn't in a dungeon." Ragnar's temper flared, but he controlled the fire, channeling it into cold authority. "She is not a symbol, General. She is the key." In the quiet that followed, Ragnar walked slowly toward the throne, taking Elara with him. Because of that forced physical contact, the court was forced to acknowledge the legitimacy of the bond. "The treaty demands a pure Vanya lineage union to sustain the protection," Ragnar explained, his voice projecting through the massive hall. "This woman's blood, through the forced rite, now acts as the focus point. She is the living ward. Her continued existence is paramount to your continued safety." What followed was a low, dissatisfied grumbling among the nobles. They looked at Elara like she was a magical cage they were trapped inside. Elara, pale but unyielding, met the glare of a high-ranking Lycanus, refusing to drop her gaze. Intriguing. She showed the unyielding endurance he valued in a strategist, not the hysteria he expected from a noblewoman. Ragnar sat heavily on the throne, pulling Elara to stand beside him. "The arrangement is simple. She will remain secluded, guarded by my most trusted unit, and educated on the nature of this fragile peace. Any act of aggression, contempt, or disloyalty directed at Queen Elara will be considered an act of war against the Leakin realm itself. Understand?" His golden eyes swept across the room, forcing compliance. Heron finally bowed, the movement stiff. "Understood, my king." Ragnar dismissed the court, the sound of their retreating feet echoing loudly. As the silence roared, he turned to Elara. "You will be taken to your quarters. Do not leave without explicit permission. Your value is high, but your life is forfeit if you compromise the stability of this realm. Am I understood?" Her voice trembled slightly, but her response was clear. "Perfectly, Your Majesty." That's why he allowed a small nod. He had secured the asset, but the internal conflict, her silent, enduring scrutiny, had just begun. He needed to understand what was beneath that fragile surface. Chapter 8. The Unwanted Houses. Ragnar stood alone, a shadow in his observatory. He wasn't watching the stars. He was watching the security feed of Elara's heavily guarded wing. His goal was simple: ensure the asset's continued existence and political function. He was dealing with a logistic problem. He was being briefed by Captain Zelia, head of the Queen's Guard. Zelia, sharp and suspicious, summarized the arrangements. "Her quarters are sealed, sire. No contact outside the designated human maid and the required treaty tutor. We have 3 patrols changing every 4 hours. I am confident no threat can reach her." "Good," Ragnar confirmed. "And her behavior?" Meanwhile, Ragnar's inner monologue was frantic. Will she flee? Will she plot? Will she simply shatter? He tried to anticipate the emotional chaos he assumed was brewing inside her, because that's what trauma did to humans. It made them unpredictable and weak. "She has been compliant," Zelia reported, her voice tinged with surprise. She ate sparingly. She merely asks questions about the treaty texts. She did, however, request a specific historical text regarding the Ethelred lineage, a minor, near-forgotten line from the First Wars. Ragnar paused, his brows furrowing. The Ethelred lineage. Why is that? It was a line known for scholarly history, not political power. Not only that, it was a line rumored to have studied the ancient treaty's magic from a non-Vanya, more objective viewpoint. Give her the text, Ragnar ordered. Catalog everything she reads. Log every question she asks. Instead of feeling relieved, Ragnar felt a prickle of annoyance. She's studying. She's adapting. He preferred his pawns to be passive, thinking pawns complicated the strategic board. As the wind shifted outside the massive windows, Ragnar asked Zelia a question that seemed irrelevant, but wasn't. Did she cry, Captain? Zelia looked surprised. No, sire. Not a tear. She merely asked if the window in her sitting room opened. And the answer? No. We informed her the air quality is better inside the keep. She felt it. Clear as day, Elara wasn't just surviving. She was assessing her prison. This scene showed the initial conflict. Ragnar treats her like a valuable object, reinforcing her belief that she is a pawn because his own internal defense mechanism demands that detachment. You may go, Captain. Ragnar dismissed her. He walked to a smaller, hidden scrying mirror on the wall, a tool he used only for critical, sensitive surveillance. He needed a direct look. That night, Ragnar decided he would observe his unwanted houseguest. He had to gauge the asset's intelligence and compliance, or else she would become a liability. Chapter 9. First Assessment. Ragnar stared into the polished surface of the scrying mirror. It showed Elara seated quietly, illuminated by the soft light of a lamp, surrounded by the dense, dusty volumes of Leakin history he had provided. She looked small in the massive, ornate chair. Her expression was one of profound focus, not despair. Her fingers traced the rough, embossed title of the Ethelred text. She should be mourning her old life, raging at her capture, Ragnar thought. She should be pleading. But then, she turned a page, and he saw the keen concentration in her eyes. It was the same look he wore when dissecting an enemy's tactical error. He was intrigued, replacing indifference. This wasn't the pampered noble he had expected. He saw her core strength, a quiet, unyielding endurance that resonated with the stone of his own citadel. She paused, lifting her eyes from the page, and looked directly toward the wall where his scrying mirror was embedded. Her heart skipped a beat, he noted, but her expression didn't change. Did she sense him? Lycans could sometimes feel the pull of concentrated magic. Instead of showing fear, she sighed softly, closed the book, and stood up. She walked to the sealed window Zelia had mentioned. She placed both hands flat against the glass, her back to the scrying mirror. Deep down, he knew the truth. She wasn't just looking at the view. She was feeling the air, the cold, the absolute enclosure of her life. She was grieving, not hysterically, but with the quiet dignity of a survivor. As the air thickened with his unwanted fascination, Ragnar saw a flicker of the trauma she carried. Her shoulders tensed. She was holding back a wave of emotion. She didn't know what scared her more, the ruthless Leakin king, or the quiet powerlessness of her position. Just like that, she pushed off the glass, smoothed her simple tunic, and returned to the desk. She picked up a quill and began making notes in a small, leather-bound journal. Her hand was steady. Ragnar watched the movement of her fingers, the concentration etched on her brow. This was dangerous. He realized she was an intellectual threat because she was observing him, his court, and his rules with the same detachment he used against his enemies. Ragnar slammed his hand down on the activation runes, cutting off the scrying mirror. The polished stone went immediately dark. He was annoyed by his own moment of interest. Intrigue is a weakness. He had categorized her as a pawn, but instead, he found a strategist who refused to be broken. The minor, unexpected crack in his detachment had widened. Vulcan, he roared into the empty room, calling for his general. He needed a report on Lord Vanya's next steps, because the external enemy was always safer to fight than the unsettling connection forming within his walls. The game had officially changed, and the king was playing with an unfamiliar piece. Chapter 10. The Diplomatic Viper. The scent of human perfume and stale fear was a jarring interruption to the citadel's usual, clean smell of stone and pine. Ragnar stood on the dais, a granite sculpture of a king, hosting Ambassador Seraphim, a slick, too confident human diplomat, Vanya's agent, in all but name. His goal was to protect his political front and eliminate Vanya's subtle influence. He viewed the ambassador as a toxic, diplomatic viper that needed to be neutralized quickly. Despite that, Seraphim was good. He smiled too broadly, his velvet attire too bright against the leaken black. He made a point of ignoring Elara, who stood stoically beside Ragnar, as required by the new treaty binding. "Your Majesty," Seraphim began, his voice a smooth, oily tenor that grated on Ragnar's leaken sensitivity. "We understand the necessity of this arrangement." He paused, letting his eyes linger on Elara, making the word arrangement sound like a crude jest. "But the stability of the human realm demands assurance. How can we trust peace when the queen lacks the political gravitas to truly represent her people? She is, forgive me, a ghost of her lineage." The insult was calculated, designed to make the Leaken Council doubt Ragnar's choice, suggesting he had deliberately chosen a weak link. A low growl rumbled in Ragnar's chest, but he kept his human expression perfectly impassive. He used his tactical superiority. "Ambassador," Ragnar responded, his voice dangerously even. "The treaty requires pure lineage and strategic compliance. Queen Elara provides both. Perhaps your concern is less about her gravitas and more about the uncomfortable fact that her presence prevents Lord Vanya from achieving the war he so clearly desires." What followed was a sharp intake of breath from Seraphim, whose smooth mask cracked for a fraction of a second. Ragnar saw the flicker of panic. "We have reports, Ambassador," Ragnar continued, leaning forward just enough to radiate alpha menace. "Reports detailing your private correspondence with known secessionists in the northern human houses. Correspondence detailing how those factions are currently funded by, let us say, unaccounted Vanya tariffs." Ragnar paused, allowing the accusation to hang like a falling axe. "The Leaken realm is not interested in political gossip, only in stability. Therefore, you have 24 hours to leave the Citadel, because your continued presence is strategically destabilizing. Inform Vanya that his agent failed." Seraphim's face went pale, the color draining from him like water from sand. He stumbled through a shaky bow. Not only that, the human diplomat's failure publicly confirmed Vanya's attempts to undermine the peace, strengthening Ragnar's position with his own council. As they retreated, Ragnar felt a brief surge of satisfaction. But the feeling was immediately smothered by a far more insidious threat. A trusted guard approached, handing Ragnar a tightly folded, anonymous missive, a piece of parchment tucked into a dark leaken leather sleeve. The message wasn't a threat, it was a symbol. A single, dark, stylized raven feather. That night, the terror of his past had found its way into his present. The battle for political dominance was won, but the enemy had just found the key to Ragnar's emotional armor. Chapter 11. The Confrontation of Shame, Midpoint. Ragnar stared at the raven feather. It was identical to the one worn by the human advisor he had trusted years ago, the advisor who had betrayed him, leading to the bloody massacre that shaped his strategic coldness. The feather was a direct, calculated reference to his past failure/trauma. His heart skipped a beat, but he forced the panic down. How? How did Vanya know his deepest secret? This was the midpoint shift. The enemy was no longer targeting the treaty, they were targeting Ragnar's mind. In that moment, Ragnar felt a wave of icy coldness, a desperate need to retreat into his shell of ruthlessness. He paced the room, running a hand through his hair, the meticulous control he valued fracturing under the intense personal pressure. Before he could speak or even roar, the heavy, iron-bound door to his study gave a soft, hesitant knock. "Elara." I apologize, Your Majesty, she said softly, stepping in before he could refuse her. She carried a tray with a steaming mug, Leekin chamomile, known for easing an alpha's tension. Her voice trembled slightly, but she stood firm. I heard the ambassador's departure. And I sensed the shift in the room after your guard left. Ragnar whirled around, defensive, his golden eyes blazing with warning. You sense nothing. Leave. This is a private strategic moment. But then she didn't flinch. She placed the tray on his desk, her gaze fixed not on him, but on the small, dark feather he had carelessly dropped. That feather, she murmured, her voice filled with quiet insight. It's not a symbol of Vanya's power. It's a symbol of your pain. That man, Seraphim, didn't fail because of your tariffs. He failed because his true purpose was to deliver that. As the truth unraveled, Ragnar felt utterly exposed. His strategic shield, his coldness, was visible to this fragile human queen. It is a distraction, Ragnar growled, grabbing the mug and taking a long, scalding gulp of the tea. No, Elara countered, stepping closer. She spoke with a quiet, unyielding conviction. A distraction is noise. That is a wound. You believe you must sacrifice trust to ensure survival. That is why you fear me. That is why you believe you have to be cold. Elara's emotional perception had pierced his armor, connecting directly to his secret burden. Ragnar felt a terrifying wave of anger and something akin to a painful, desperate hope. You understand nothing of what I lost, he snapped, slamming the mug down, the pottery rattling violently. I understand that a king who fears his own vulnerability will eventually be conquered by it, she said, her chest aching. Vanya didn't send that feather to start a war. He sent it to make you repeat your failure, to push you into choosing a cold strategy over the trust you're terrified to feel. He saw his shield was visible, and it shattered Ragnar's indifference. He realized she was right. He recognized her insight and humanity, challenging his misbelief that feelings were weak. He retreated emotionally, stepping back toward the hearth. Prepare yourself, he bit out, his voice curt and dismissive, rebuilding his walls instantly. There will be a public appearance at the Harvest Festival. Your visibility is about to increase, Queen. Do not disgrace the crown. The game had changed. The stakes were now deeply personal, and Ragnar had been forced to recognize the strategic mind of the pawn he intended to discard. Chapter 12. The Public Display. The Harvest Festival was usually a moment of Leekin unity and primal joy. Today, it was a political minefield. Ragnar stood next to Elara, her human presence a deliberate provocation to his skeptical court. His goal was to present an impenetrable facade of unity and control, quelling the political rumors Vanya was feeding. Ragnar treated the appearance like a military operation. Every glance, every posture, was calculated. He kept a careful distance from Elara, the touch purely professional, and yet his Leekin senses were hyper-aware of her every movement. Meanwhile, the Leekin citizens' reaction was stark. They didn't cheer. They watched Elara with a chilling, judging silence, like a predator assessing weak prey. Remember your instructions, Queen, Ragnar murmured, his voice too low for anyone but her to hear. Show no weakness. No fear. I haven't survived my uncle's court to crumble before a silent wolf, Elara murmured back, her voice low, steady, and entirely free of challenge. She felt it, clear as day, the hatred washing over her. But she performed flawlessly. When a Leekin elder presented her with a symbolic, hostile gift, a piece of dried, brittle thistle, she accepted it with a serene, perfect nod, managing to look graceful and resilient. Ragnar watched, surprised. Her poise was not pretense, it was unyielding endurance. The performance was better than any seasoned human diplomat could manage. As fire bloomed beneath her skin from the pressure, she refused to break. Goal shift. Ragnar felt a strange, protective surge that had nothing to do with the treaty. He realized she was an asset that could think and act for peace, not just a passive magical key. Because of that, the political pressure on him was slightly relieved. But then, the Leekin General Heron approached them, his expression grim. Your Majesty, we have visual confirmation. Lord Vanya's forces are mobilizing near the Shadow Pass. Not merely rhetoric this time. They are moving heavy siege machinery. It's an overt escalation. Ragnar's gaze sharpened, the momentary distraction of Elara's impressive performance vanishing. Vanya was pressing the attack, utilizing the distraction of the Queen to make his final move. As they retreated from the silent, watchful crowd, Ragnar grabbed Elara's wrist. This time, the contact was less about possession and more about a desperate, fleeting bond against a world descending into madness. His people were in danger, and Ragnar realized the price of this queen's presence was about to become terrifyingly high. Chapter 13. The War Room Trust. The map projections in the war room were no longer passive symbols. They were flashing red with troop movements. Vanya's aggressive mobilization near the Shadow Pass was real. His goal was to exploit Elara's unique knowledge to counteract this imminent threat. He needed an angle the Lycans couldn't provide. Despite that, bringing Elara into this room, the very heart of his strategic mind, was a calculated risk, a genuine act of strategic trust. He was breaking protocol, exposing his operational plans to the human pawn. He knew his council would balk if they knew. Elara stood rigidly beside the central table, looking overwhelmed by the sheer, brutal honesty of the military display. The air smelled of metallic ink and fear, a sharp contrast to the lavender scent she carried. Lord Vanya is not marching his main army to the pass, Ragnar stated, pointing to a large, vulnerable supply depot far to the south. He is only threatening the pass to fix our attention. His true objective must be softer, more valuable. He didn't know what scared her more, the threat of war, or the sight of the King of Wolves relying on her. What is your assessment, Queen? Ragnar demanded. Elara didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her focus intense. Vanya is desperate, Your Majesty. He needs legitimacy now. The pass is a military target. But then, the south, that depot. It is owned by Baroness Maria, Vanya's most powerful court rival. She felt it, clear as day, the political maneuvering beneath the surface. If he captures Maria's assets, he gains two things: crucial war supplies and the ability to crush his internal human rivals. He destroys his political enemies while fighting you. Ragnar stared at the map, then at Elara. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. That's why Vanya's tactical movement seemed unnecessarily exposed. It was bait. You are suggesting the military threat is political cover, Ragnar murmured, his voice slow with comprehension. That he values Maria's downfall as much as, or more than, victory at the pass. He is a viper, not a lion, Elara confirmed quietly. He attacks where the enemy is weak and distracted, because he knows you're focused on the larger threat. Commitment. Ragnar reached out and tapped a command onto the map, shifting the deployment of 3 key Lycan regiments from the Shadow Pass to Maria's depot. It was a massive, last-minute gamble based entirely on the insight of the human queen. He was relying on Elara's judgment over his own Lycan advisors. Your analysis is sound, Ragnar conceded, his voice grudgingly respectful. It saves us blood. As the bond pulsed between them, a nascent understanding forged in strategy, Ragnar felt a dangerous warmth. This was the first genuine act of strategic trust, and it frightened him more than Vanya's army.
Chapter 14. Coup countered.
Ragnar stood on the balcony, watching his council below. They were tense, arguing over the unexpected shift in troop movement. General Heron was red-faced, demanding an explanation for pulling forces from the pass. His goal was to secure the internal integrity of his rule. He had to prove Elara's strategic value, or else he risked a coup from within his own ranks. Meanwhile, the Lycan messenger entered the chamber below, interrupting the debate. "Sire," the messenger announced, his voice ringing with relief. The southern deployment was a success. Vanya's forward siege unit was caught completely exposed at the Maria depot. They were routed. Not only that, General Vulcan captured a Vanya agent attempting to incite an assassination plot against General Heron himself. The council chamber descended into stunned silence. Heron, the most skeptical of Elara's presence, looked pale with shock. As the silence stretched, Ragnar felt a deep surge of satisfaction. Elara's effectiveness was proven. She had saved Heron's life and secured a strategic victory for the Leaken realm, all without touching a weapon. Consequences of commitment. Ragnar was forced to acknowledge Elara's crucial, non-military contribution. He had to concede her worth extended far beyond just the treaty's magical lock. With a single glance, Ragnar caught Heron's eye below. The old general offered a sharp, respectful nod of thanks. The seeds of internal dissent had been neutralized. But then, Vanya's retaliation was swift and brutal. Ragnar's main comms console flashed red. Vanya had launched a major propaganda campaign using enchanted, wideband signals. The messages were simple, aggressive, and highly effective. The Leaken King is weakened. He trusts a human spy. He is being played by the human pawn. The pressure was mounting from the outside. Vanya was doubling down, making the relationship, the necessity of their forced intimacy, the new central point of the war. His world tilted. He had won the battle, but then he realized the true fight was about to begin, the battle for the loyalty of his heart and his people. Chapter 15. The Shared Burden. The political and military pressure was a physical weight on Ragnar's chest. He stripped off his heavy king's tunic, leaving him bare to the waist, the scars of past battles crisscrossing his skin. He was physically exhausted, but his Leaken mind refused to rest. His goal was to resist the emotional opening, yet reluctantly accept the silent, strategic comfort. He had won the day, but the cost was an overwhelming exhaustion that gnawed at his resolve. In the stillness that followed, the door to his chamber opened softly. Elara. She stood in the doorway, wearing a simple nightgown, her silhouette fragile in the dark hall light. She wasn't seeking comfort or demanding anything. She simply walked over to him, her steps quiet on the polished stone. She didn't speak. She didn't ask about Vanya or the propaganda. As if fate demanded it, she stood behind him, placing her slender, trembling hands on his bare, scarred shoulders. The contact was a jolt, not one of desire, but one of pure, silent, unexpected support. She wasn't touching him as his queen or his pawn. She was touching him as a fellow survivor. Ragnar stiffened, his body instinctively resisting the comfort. He was a king. He did not need touch. He did not need sentiment. His deep conflict flared. "Don't," he muttered, the word a raw rasp. "I won't shatter," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "And neither will you. You saved my people today, Ragnar. You risked your strategy, on my word. That is not a weakness. That is the greatest strength." She was speaking his language, the language of strategy and necessity, but infusing it with humanity. The space between them burned. Despite that, the forged documents spread across the desk were an exquisite masterpiece of psychological warfare. Vanya had used the stolen intelligence, the raven feather, the private records, to weave a terrifying, seamless narrative. His goal was to analyze the threat, protect his reputation, and, most importantly, protect the Leaken people. In the span of a breath, Ragnar absorbed the shock. The file didn't accuse him of being weak. It accused Elara of being the weakness. It presented a fake-paper trail linking her distant Vanya lineage to the very human factions responsible for his past massacre, painting her as a strategic time bomb waiting to detonate the realm. "It's a lie," Ragnar muttered, his voice hoarse. He knew it was forged. He knew Elara's insight had saved them yesterday. But then, the evidence was meticulous. Manufactured banking transfers, coded letters, and even fake witness statements. It was designed to convince the Leaken Council, who already despised the human queen, that she was strategically dangerous. Vanya had used the one thing Ragnar feared, personal trust leading to strategic failure, against him. His heart skipped a beat, but this time, it was a cold, calculating fear for his people. If the council saw this, they wouldn't question Vanya. They would question Ragnar's judgment and demand Elara's execution, potentially violating the treaty entirely and starting the war anyway. He must believe I chose emotion over logic. The choice was monstrous. Protect the woman he was just beginning to trust, or protect the millions of lives she was now positioned to endanger. Because of that, Ragnar knew there was only one path for the king. He had to revert to his cold, strategic core. He had to eliminate the perceived weakness. Without another word, Ragnar picked up the secure comms device. His hand shook slightly, betraying the internal devastation he was masking. "Captain Zelia," he commanded, his voice flat and brutally cold. "Secure Queen Elara. Immediate confinement. No communication. Tell the council she is being held for treason." Major setback. He chose strategy over personal trust, sacrificing the one person he was learning to trust to fulfill his strategic duty. He felt the iron of his own betrayal twisting in his gut. His world tilted. He had to eliminate the queen to save the kingdom. Chapter 17. The Cold Sacrifice. The Emergency War Council was chaotic. The moment the word treason left Ragnar's lips, the chamber erupted. "I knew it!" Heron roared, pounding his fist on the table. The human pawn was a bomb. Ragnar let the rage and betrayal of his council wash over him. His goal was to restore the faith of his court and protect the treaty by eliminating the apparent vulnerability. He knew his position was precarious. Ragnar stood tall, his presence absolute. "Silence," he commanded, the force of his alpha roar silencing the room instantly. He was emotional devastation masked by absolute, brutal strategic coldness. He could still feel the phantom weight of Elara's hands on his shoulders, the fleeting, terrifying connection they had shared hours before. He had to bury it. The evidence linking Queen Elara's lineage to Vanya's financial manipulation is irrefutable, Ragnar lied, the deceit tasting like ash. In fact, he made the claim because he knew this lie, a betrayal of trust, was the only way to protect the strategic reality. She was a liability we neutralized just in time. The lowest point was approaching. He looked at the faces of his generals, faces now relieved, believing their king had chosen logic over the heart. "Her imprisonment ensures the treaty remains stable. We have proven to Vanya that he cannot divide this court with his petty human tricks," Ragnar declared, his voice ringing with fake victory. "My decision is final, strategy over sentiment. Always." As the truth unraveled, he was cementing his old, broken belief system. He was sacrificing the one key alliance he needed to win, simply to soothe the paranoia of his court. He was seemingly repeating his past mistakes by pushing away trust. He saw his shield was visible, but this time it was being celebrated. The council agreed to his war plans, their faith in his ruthlessness restored. With every step he took, retreating from the victorious council chamber, the weight of his sacrifice pressed down. He felt utterly hollow. Chapter 18. The Dark Night of the Soul. This was the all is lost moment. Ragnar was completely alone. He walked to the corner, facing away from the empty space where Elara had stood. He stripped the heavy, gold-chased alpha mantle from his shoulders, letting the fur-lined cloak fall into a heap on the cold stone floor. He stared at his reflection in the dark, still surface of his wash basin, a grim, scarred visage of a king. His goal was to face the emptiness of his strategic existence. Was it worth it? The strategic win felt like utter defeat. His internal misbelief, that emotion is weakness, had led him to betray a genuine ally, perhaps losing the war anyway, because now he had no one to trust but his own flawed judgment. He was consumed by the moral contradiction. He had sacrificed Elara for the greater good, but then he felt the core value of his people, loyalty, pack, and heart, had been sacrificed, too. He was safe, but utterly broken. He felt it, clear as day, the profound sense of moral bankruptcy. The air thickened with his despair. He had become the cold, unfeeling monster Vanya had tried to paint him as. He was utterly alone. Her name hung in the air, unspoken, a ghost of comfort he had brutally rejected. Suddenly a knock. Soft, hesitant, and at level 3 security. It was the low-ranking Leakin guard from the southern depot, the one whose life Elara's insight had saved. Ragnar pulled on a tunic, his Leakin instincts immediately alert. The guard was loyal, but this was highly irregular. "Enter," Ragnar commanded, his voice tight. The guard, a young Leakin named Kale, entered, his face pale with urgency and fear. He carried a small, sealed, unmarked leather satchel. "Your Majesty," Kale whispered, dropping to one knee. "I intercepted this from a Vanya courier on the southern road. It's not propaganda, sire. It's the original plan, the one that was switched." Kale pushed the satchel toward the king. His final hope lay in the hands of the lowest guard, whose loyalty was forged not by the king's ruthlessness, but by the queen's unexpected wisdom. His crucible moment was interrupted. The fight for his soul was not over yet. Chapter 19. The Allies' Truth. The small, unmarked leather satchel sat heavy on Ragnar's desk. He recognized the stitching. It was a standard Vanya courier bag, but crudely modified. His goal was to absorb the political reality and the personal guilt, to find the truth that would free Elara and expose Vanya's ultimate lie. He dismissed the loyal guard, Kale, with a curt, appreciative nod, telling him to seal his lips. Then, Ragnar tore open the satchel. Inside lay the real evidence. Not the forged, convoluted treason documents, but then the meticulously detailed plan for the diplomatic summit. It confirmed everything. Vanya had planned to use the summit not for peace, but as a grand stage to publicly discover the forged evidence against Elara, thereby shaming Ragnar into submission and fracturing the Leakin Council. As the truth unraveled, Ragnar felt a crushing wave of self-loathing. He hadn't just sacrificed Elara, he had played directly into Vanya's hands. His own strategy over sentiment had almost been his downfall because it had blinded him to the one person who was entirely free of Vanya's political games. Renewed hope/transformation. He realized his past failure wasn't just trusting, but misplacing trust in a political viper. Elara was not a viper. She was the only strategic mind he had truly encountered who was purely motivated by survival and peace, not ambition. Her world tilted. He was wrong, and admitting that wrongness was the foundation of his transformation. Ragnar immediately called for Captain Zelia. "Release the prisoner, carefully.
Now."
Without another word, he grabbed a warm cloak and headed for the Queen's guarded wing. His goal was resolute. The evidence allowed him to shift from self-preservation to absolute protection of Elara. He felt it, clear as day, the profound, desperate need to apologize and give her a true choice. Chapter 20. The King's Surrender. The small confinement chamber was stark, cold, and smelled faintly of dust and Elara's quiet grief. She was sitting on the edge of the cot when Ragnar entered. She looked up, her face pale, her luminous eyes flat and devoid of anger, just an overwhelming, deep disappointment. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice completely neutral. "I assume you have come to execute the sentence. A king must clean up his messes." Her voice trembled slightly, but her conviction held. Ragnar stood before her, the king of the Lycans, the alpha who had chosen strategy over her life. He was focused, but now driven by a new, shared purpose. He knelt before her, a gesture he hadn't made since his coronation. "Elara," he said, using her name, not her title, for the first time. "I apologize. I chose strategy over truth, and in doing so, I became the very weakness Vanya sought to exploit. You were right." He held out the two documents, the forged trap and the real plan. In that moment, he consciously chose to trust her, making a pivotal personal choice. Elara took the documents, her fingers brushing his. She read them swiftly, her expression shifting from resignation to fierce, cold determination. "Vanya intends to assassinate you at the summit, not just shame you," she stated, her voice sharp with realization. "He needs the kingdom destabilized so he can claim the vacuum." "Yes," Ragnar confirmed. "And he believes I have fractured our court by imprisoning you. He believes I am coming to the summit alone, desperate and strategically blind." "He believes you are weak," Elara finished. "We will disabuse him of that notion," Ragnar said, standing. His goal was to execute the final plan, secure lasting peace by publicly defeating Vanya. "The plan is simple. You come with me." not as a queen, but as a strategic equal. We expose his treason simultaneously, the forged documents and the assassination plot. If we fail, we both die, Elara noted, meeting his gaze. If we succeed, we destroy his reputation and secure a peace stronger than the original treaty. That's why I need you to lead the political exposure. Only you can convince the human diplomats that Vanya's betrayal runs through their own court. Preparing for the end, Ragnar offered her his hand, not as king to subject, but as partner to partner. With a single glance, she accepted it. This was the completion of his ideological shift. Strategic trust is necessary for strength. As if pulled by a string, Ragnar turned to the door, giving the final command to Captain Zelia, who was waiting outside. Prepare the final details, the gold box, and secure the pass to the summit. Now. The path was set, and the final confrontation awaited them both. Chapter 21. The Journey to the Summit. They rode together alone, on the king's strongest warhorse, a massive, black creature that handled the steep path with ease. Elara was seated before him, close, but their shared silence was no longer hostile. It was immense resolve and anticipation. Ragnar remembered the journey, when he had carried her, a shell-shocked object. Now, she was an armor-clad ally, her heart beating a steady, determined rhythm against his chest. The tension was immense. He felt it, clear as day, the profound difference. Back then, he saw a vulnerability he had to eliminate. Now, he saw a strength he had to defend. "Are you afraid, Queen?" Ragnar asked, his voice low, sounding more like a confession than a query. Elara leaned back slightly, her head resting near his shoulder. "If I am afraid, Your Majesty, it is because I fear you will choose to save me over saving the peace. That would mean Vanya wins." Her body moved on instinct, seeking closeness, yet speaking of duty. Ragnar's grip on the reins tightened. He had to protect Elara during the approach. "My plan ensures the safety of the kingdom first. And you are, strategically, part of the kingdom." "I am more than strategy, Ragnar," she whispered, using his name again, forcing a connection he couldn't deny. "I am the truth you were afraid to see." With every heartbeat, he knew she was right. He had been so terrified of repeating his past failure that he almost committed a greater one. Ragnar pulled the horse to a halt at a precipice overlooking the summit location, a sprawling, neutral ground between the Leakin and human lands. "Look at that place," he ordered. "1 hour from now, Vanya will try to destroy everything you see." She didn't know what scared her more, the visible enemy or the invisible bond growing between them. Ragnar reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small, heavy golden box, the box Zelia had secured. "This is our final weapon. Vanya will not see this coming." As if the world narrowed to this moment, Ragnar secured the box on his belt. He looked down at Elara. They were two rulers, heading into certain danger, bound by blood, magic, and a terrifying, escalating respect. "Let's end this," Ragnar stated, kicking the horse into a final, determined trot. The time for strategy was past. The time for the king and his queen to conquer their fear was now. Chapter 22. The Climax. The air at the summit table crackled with ill-concealed hostility. Ragnar and Elara sat across from Lord Vanya, who was flanked by the nervous chief human diplomat and several armed guards. Vanya looked smug, utterly convinced of his imminent victory. His goal was to publicly shame and assassinate Ragnar, then claim the ensuing power vacuum. With every step he took, Ragnar felt Elara's presence beside him, calm, collected, and ready. He felt the weight of the gold box secured on his belt. "Your Majesty," Vanya purred, leaning forward. "We are deeply disturbed by the sudden confinement of Queen Elara. The rumors of her treasonous ties to the old warlords are unsettling. We must address this breach of security." Vanya made his final move, reaching into his coat and pulling out a document, the forged evidence of Elara's treason. "I move that the human court investigates the Queen's role immediately, because only absolute transparency can restore the treaty." Ragnar remained stone-faced, allowing Vanya to expose his hand. His goal was to defeat Vanya and ensure the safety of his queen. Lord Vanya, Ragnar stated, his voice a cold steel edge. Your concern for Queen Elara is touching. But perhaps we should discuss your own breach of transparency. But then, before Vanya could react, Elara leaned forward, her hands steady on the table. She took the political lead. Ambassador, Elara addressed the chief human diplomat, ignoring Vanya entirely. Lord Vanya is using a forgery designed to distract you. You have already received true, confirmed evidence of his actions. As the truth unraveled, Elara produced a simple sheaf of papers, the original Vanya plot Kale had intercepted, detailing the assassination attempt and the financial manipulation of the other human houses. Lord Vanya has not only plotted the king's death, but also the ruin of the Mireia and Atherton houses, Elara declared, her voice ringing with clear, indisputable authority. He seeks to replace the treaty with tyranny, and he provided the proof himself. Vanya's smug mask shattered. He was defeated. He lunged across the table, his hand flying toward a hidden switch beneath the dais, the signal for his assassin. Without thinking, Ragnar moved. A blur of movement. His world tilted. He slammed the golden box onto the table. It wasn't a weapon. It was a countermeasure. The box, laced with Leakin truth magic, resonated, emitting a low, vibrating hum. The sound immediately forced the hidden assassin, a Leakin renegade Vanya had paid, to step into the open, dropping his weapon and screaming as the magic violently rejected the deceit. The king is protected by truth, Ragnar roared, standing over the table, his Leakin aura overwhelming the space. And my queen secured it. Vanya was defeated. Ragnar's survival was secured not through his ruthlessness, but through trusting Elara's courage and insight. Chapter 23. Falling Action. The scene was chaotic, but controlled. Vanya was quickly restrained, screaming impotently about the conspiracy. The human diplomat, pale and trembling, immediately defected to Ragnar's side, having witnessed Vanya's treason and the assassination plot unfold. His goal was to consolidate power and peace. Ragnar placed a firm, protective hand on Elara's shoulder. She was breathing heavily, the adrenaline fading, but she was radiant with fierce triumph. Ragnar addressed the combined forces, Leakin and loyal human guards. Lord Vanya's plot is broken. His treason is confirmed. The Treaty of Thorns and Fangs is not only restored, but strengthened by this demonstration of mutual vigilance. In the echo of his voice, the air felt cleaner, lighter. The oppressive, negative magic of the breach was gone. Ragnar turned to the human diplomat. The human court will handle Vanya's sentence. More importantly, this settlement requires Queen Elara's signature. She is not merely a key, she is the co-architect of this renewed peace. Winding down, Ragnar's public acknowledgement was total. The Leakin generals watched, no longer with suspicion, but with genuine respect. The union was legitimized not by force, but by a shared strategic victory. Ragnar looked at Elara, allowing a faint, genuine smile, a rare expression that softened the harsh lines of his face. He reached out and gently brushed a smudge of soot from her cheek. The pressure broke. We return to the citadel, he told her, his voice low. As rulers, not captives. He had won the war, and now, the true journey of being a king, one who ruled with strategic trust, could begin. Chapter 24. Resolution. Ragnar stood on the dais, watching his court. It was the same room where Heron had demanded Elara be thrown into a dungeon. Now, as Elara entered the room, the Leakin generals and nobles bowed deeply, their respect palpable. The Leakin court now treated Elara with respect. His goal was to savor the peace, affirm the new relationship, and fully embrace his transformation. Ragnar's gaze, "You only broke the wrong rule, king." Elara corrected him gently, her hand tracing the faint scar on his cheek. "The new rule is better." As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Ragnar leaned down, his lips just brushing her ear. "Then perhaps, tonight, we should explore the other rules of this necessary union." The space between them burned with possibility, a terrifying blend of strategic necessity and undeniable desire. Epilogue: The Ramparts. Ragnar stood on the highest rampart, the mountain wind still biting, but then the silence felt different. It was the quiet of stability, not the coldness of isolation. Elara joined him, pulling his cloak tighter around her. She wasn't just standing beside him, she was leaning into him, a partner, a warmth against the stone. "We have received the diplomatic reports," Elara murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. "The human court is stable. They respect the king and his Leaken queen." Ragnar wrapped his arm around her, the gesture now second nature. His focus was no longer on fear but on the future. "My rule is secure," Ragnar confirmed, "and my heart is strategically deployed." Elara laughed, a soft, melodic sound he had come to cherish. As the sky darkened further, they looked out at the peaceful valley below. "What is our next difficult political decision, my king?" Elara asked. Ragnar turned, looking down at his queen, his gaze filled with a love that felt far more powerful than any treaty. "The next difficult decision," Ragnar said, his voice husky, his true voice, "is deciding what name to give our first child." Just like that, everything changed, moving from the dark complexity of war to the profound, simple joy of their earned beginning.